Villisca, Iowa, June 1912. A neighbor reaches the Moore house after sunrise to find the front door locked. When a key is found, inside, 8 people have been killed in their beds, 2 adults and 6 children. By the time the town of Villisca wakes, the scene is already losing the only thing that ever solves a crime. And for over a century, investigators, journalists, and would-be detectives would crawl all over this case, only for it to remain unsolved to this day. Welcome to the Time and Tales podcast. Dark history, strange lore, one tale at a time. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Time and Tales podcast. I'm Lene, and I'm going to actually be flying solo today. CJ is out of town, so it's just me, and I do have a little bit of a cold, so I apologize for any sound quality issues, particularly those relating to the fact that I can't breathe out of my nose. So in tonight's episode, I want to share one of the most interesting books I've read in the last few years, The Man from the Train by Bill James and his daughter Rachel. The book is a historical true crime that takes a deep dive into a spate of axe murders throughout the early 20th century America, from Massachusetts to Oregon and back again. And to kick off the theory his book explores, we'll need to take a hard look at the unsolved murder case that has haunted the country for more than 100 years, the Villisca axe murders. But before we get started, a couple of updates. If you like what we do and want to support the show, we actually do have a Patreon. That's at patreon.com/timeandtalespodcast. At the Lore Librarian tier, you'll get every episode ad-free up to 2 days earlier than everyone else. And at the Dark Historian tier, you'll get all of that and access to outtakes, show transcripts, and a shout-out every week. We're just starting out and really looking to make this our full-time gig, so we really appreciate your help. If you just want to see some pictures and some details from each episode, then you should definitely check out the Instagram. Really quickly, I want to give a shout out to my dad who does our theme song, and that is his song North Country. And if you like the vibe and tone, then I definitely recommend that you go over to randyleerevere.com. And Revere is spelled R-I-V as in Victor, I-E-R-E. I'll make sure to link his website and all of our new links in the show notes. Okay, so that is all the business that I have right now. So let's get to the show. Josiah Joe Moore ran a successful farm implement business in Villisca, a small railroad town in southwest Iowa. He held the local John Deere franchise, and earlier he worked for Frank Jones, an older, powerful Villisca businessman who later became one of the case's most argued over suspects. Moore eventually opened his own competing operation across from Jones, and people in town noticed that kind of rivalry. Sarah Moore, born Sarah Montgomery, carried real weight in the church community. Their children were Herman, 11, Catherine, 10, Arthur, 7, and Paul, 5. On June 9, 1912, the Moore family attends a Children's Day program at their Presbyterian church. The children took visible parts in the church program, dressed in Sunday clothes. After the program, Mary Catherine invites the Stillinger sisters to the Moore home for a sleepover. Lena Stillinger, 12, and Ina Stillinger, 8, from a well-off farm family living several miles outside of town. The invitation happened by telephone earlier that evening, with permission given by the girl's older sister, Blanche. The Moores were a stable, socially anchored family, church-tied, visible, and familiar enough that their sudden absence the next morning triggered immediate concern. Early June in southwest Iowa brings long daylight and warm nights, conditions that keep windows open and routines predictable. That detail fixes the last hours before the murders. A community event, a short trip home, then a household that now includes 2 extra children for the night. Neighbors expected morning motion from that house, and the lack of it is what triggered the first check. At about 7 a.m. on Monday, neighbor Mary Peckham becomes concerned after she notices the family has not come out for morning chores. She knocks, no response. She tries the door and finds it locked. She lets the chickens out and then calls Ross Moore, another neighbor. Ross knocks and shouts, no response. He unlocks the front door with a copy of the key. Peckham stays on the porch. Ross enters the parlor and opens the guest bedroom door, where he finds Lena and Ina Stillinger dead in bed. He tells Peckham to call Hank Horton, a sheriff's deputy. Horton arrives and searches the house. He finds the entire Moore family and the 2 Stillinger girls dead. By the time word spreads on the morning of June 10th, the investigation begins in the worst possible way. The scene fills before officials can control it. After the bodies are discovered, The town's telephone office sends an all-call, and people converge on the home fast. An all-call is basically an alert system. The scene becomes contaminated early, with large numbers of townspeople moving through rooms and handling evidence that should have never been touched. Coroner L.A. Lindquist arrives around 9 a.m. to meet with Officer Horton and Sheriff Orrin Jackson. Lindquist pushes for a perimeter and urges the sheriff to request the Iowa National Guard. By roughly 10:30 a.m., guardsmen establish a perimeter. That perimeter helps to clear a lot of the townspeople away, but it arrives after the house has already served as a public spectacle for hours. Even after the perimeter goes up, the formal work starts late. The coroner calls the coroner's jury together later in the day, and the bodies are not removed until late that night, after the county attorney is contacted for permission. The fire station becomes a temporary morgue, and transport finishes close to 2 a.m. on June 11th. So the first investigation looks like this: a morning crowd, delayed control, and a case that starts with fingerprints, footprints, and object placement already compromised by human traffic. Coroner Lindquist and other medical professionals associated with the coroner's office conclude the murders occurred between midnight and 5 a.m. on Monday. According to their findings, the scene reads as follows. The killer or killers begin upstairs in the master bedroom where Joe and Sarah sleep. Joe receives more blows than any victim, and summaries describe damage so severe that his eyes are destroyed. A gouge mark appears in the ceiling from an axe swing. The killer attacks the Moore children next in their beds upstairs. The killer returns to the master bedroom for more blows. The killer goes downstairs to the guest room and kills Lena and Ina Stillinger in bed, using the same blunt force method. So not only is this guy going from room to room, essentially assassinating an entire family, he stops killing for a moment. He goes back into the master bedroom to give Joe more blows. And to me, this is one of the strongest arguments for Joe having known his killer. But then the killer starts to do things that don't make a lot of sense. You might think someone who was planning to murder an entire family would try to get out of Dodge as fast as possible, but not this guy. He hung around, moving from room to room, covering mirrors and windows with blankets or clothing removed from drawers and dressers. The sheriff's office also reported an upstairs gas lamp found with the chimney removed and the wick turned down to give a small amount of light. For us modern folk, a chimney and a gas lamp is that little glass piece that fits over the wick, and it helps to keep the entire thing from heating up too fast or bursting in your hand, as far as I am aware. Also found in the house was the murder weapon, an axe that belonged to Joe Moore. It was found in the guest room, leaning against the door jamb, as if the killer were signing his work with a cocky smirk. Unfortunately, with the scene compromised, the case turns towards narrative. Investigators start sorting a short list the way small towns always do. Who had a motive? Who had access? Who had a reason to vanish before sunrise? And who seemed to carry the wrong kind of attention? The names that keep resurfacing fall into two buckets: local rivalry and outsider suspicion. The first of these, Reverend George Kelly, enters the suspect list because he was a stranger in town with access to the town's schedule. He was an English-born traveling minister in Villisca for the Children's Day services. You know, the service that the entire family and their two young visitors attended the evening before their deaths. He would actually catch a train leaving town very early in the morning, right before the bodies are discovered. In both conversation and letters between personal friends and acquaintances, he would claim to have knowledge about the murders that no one else had, even going so far as to involve himself in the ongoing investigation by writing letters to the sheriff's office in Villisca. And if any listeners happen to be true crime fans, well, we kind of know what that means, don't we? Killers like to involve themselves in investigations as often as possible, either A, to relive the crime, or B, to ensure that they are not under suspicion. In fact, if you happen to go look through any list of serial killers, I would say probably 3 out of 5 of them involve themselves in their investigation in one way or another. Maybe that's a number I pulled out of my butt, but I think you could check it and it might be pretty close to accurate. In any case, investigators would circle back to him again and again after a later arrest for obscene mail and harassment. Eventually, he would sign a confession that he would later withdraw, and the legal system tests him twice. One trial ends with a hung jury, and the second ends with an acquittal. Kelly becomes the case's only courtroom suspect, and his acquittal becomes a major turning point because it drains momentum from the only prosecution the state ever attempts. The next suspect, Frank F. Jones, becomes the community's most durable motive suspect because he is not a drifter or a rumor. He is a Villisca insider with power. He's not only a Villisca resident, he's also an Iowa state senator, placing him in the Moore story through Joe Moore's work history. You see, Moore worked for Jones and then opened a competing implement business, and the town treated that split as a serious rivalry. Most small-town residents believe that you can't really hate someone unless you know them, and you wouldn't really kill someone unless you really hated them. And by all accounts, Frank and Joe did not like each other one bit. But naturally, without any concrete evidence and without any testimony, Frank Jones would soon lose appeal as a suspect. With his political ties and being a state senator, he was probably making the investigation look pretty bad for pointing the finger at him to begin with. Because as much as the small town wanted to believe that a rivalry like this could breed murders on this scale, not liking someone is also not indicative of a crime. But interestingly, before Jones could be dropped as a suspect, they had to figure out how he would be involved in the killings in the first place. The Jones theory mutated into a, quote, hired man, end quote, version through William Mansfield, an ex-convict and former soldier pulled into the story by private investigators' claim that Jones paid him to kill the family. That claim forces action in 1916. Mansfield is arrested and brought in, but payroll records place him in Illinois at the time of the murders, and he is released. Then Mansfield spends real effort fighting back. He would later sue the investigator James Wilkerson and win $2,225 in damages. I'm not sure what that would be in today's money, but it's a lot more than $2,000, I can tell you that. If you're good at math, please let me know in the comments what that would convert to because I'm very curious. Mansfield's cast iron alibi emphasizes how the feud-driven rancor around Jones continued despite the fact that they didn't have any evidence to support it either way. The last official suspect, Henry Lee Moore, no relation, enters the Villisca conversation through a different door. A Justice Department agent, W.M. McCarthy, floats the idea that one offender may connect several Midwest axe murders, and he suggests Moore as a candidate. Moore is a known killer rather than a local rival. He was convicted for killing his mother and grandmother with an axe. McCarthy's proposal becomes one of the earliest forms of the, quote, linked crimes, end quote, idea, and it later helps set the stage for broader pattern arguments like the man from the train. After the crowd contamination, the inquest, and years of suspicion, the only suspect ever tested in court is Kelly, and the final outcome is acquittal. From that point forward, the case keeps generating theories and names, but it stops producing a path the state can prosecute with confidence. The murders remain unsolved, and the house later gets restored in the 1990s to become known publicly as the Villisca Axe Murder House. And fun fact, the Villisca House is now a museum, so if you want to book a macabre Americana tour, you could definitely stop by there and check it out yourself. I don't personally know how I feel about that kind of thing because part of me wants to go visit places like that, like the Borden House, for example, but at the same time, I always feel kind of weird about it, so I don't know, maybe I should just lean into my weird and go do it. Would you guys go see this house? Let me know in the comments because I need to make a decision and, I'm influenceable. Before we get into the man from the train, it helps to know who Bill James is. Bill James, born George William James in 1949, became famous in a world far away from true crime. He made his name as a baseball writer and statistician, and he helped pioneer the modern analytical approach to the sport that he later called sabermetrics. Do you guys remember the movie Moneyball with Brad Pitt? I'm pretty sure that that's sabermetrics. They're basically analyzing player ratios, and they take the number of hits that they have and divide it by the number of runs that they have and something. I don't know. I don't do math. But I'm fairly certain that sabermetrics is explained in detail in that film. Anyway, sabermetrics is built around the idea that you can learn something real by comparing patterns across large sets of data instead of relying on tradition or, vibes. Bill has written dozens of books on baseball and analysis, and in 2006, Time named him to the Time 100 list of influential people. So when Bill James discovers the Villisca murders, he applies his pattern recognition theories in The Man from the Train, published by Scribner in 2017, co-written with his daughter Rachel McCarthy James. He starts with one unsolved case, decides the offender's behavior looks practiced, and then expands outward through newspaper archives looking for other family murders that share the same cluster of details. The argument Bill makes in The Man from the Train is that Villisca is not an isolated incident. He reads the scene as the work of a practiced offender, then searches period newspapers for similar crimes. He brings in his daughter, Rachel McCarthy James, to expand the archive work. The method begins with Villisca's repeated scene behaviors. Whole households killed in bed with an axe, lamp chimneys removed and the wicks turned down, coverings placed over mirrors using clothing pulled from the home, and very often, young girls having been molested before death. The Man from the Train identifies scores of family murders committed from 1898 to 1912 across North America. Locations range from Nova Scotia to Oregon and also Kansas, Florida, and Arkansas. The authors claim this offender killed a minimum of 59 people and possibly over 100. The book also notes that in the early 1900s, some crimes were attributed to a suspected killer known as, quote, Billy the Axeman, end quote. The authors argue the offender was responsible for a wider range of crimes than earlier linking allowed. The Billy the Axeman theory actually has its own Wikipedia page, which describes the classic Midwestern series as family killings in bed. It also includes possible signature characteristics that overlap with Villisca's public narrative, including the covering of faces and aspects of scene staging. Here's where it gets interesting. In The Man from the Train, the authors tie the Billy the Axeman theory together with murders across the country that hadn't even been cataloged at that time, describing a dozen or more cases in detail that are not as known as Villisca. And surprisingly, a great number of these share almost every single detail with Villisca. Families attacked at night in their beds with an axe, and specifically the broadside of the axe rather than the blade, which is a detail that isn't widely shared about Villisca. Windows and mirrors covered just like at the Villisca house. Doors locked from the inside. Very close proximity to train tracks or a train crossing, and usually the presence of a prepubescent girl who was molested at the time of their death. The two young girls sleeping on the ground floor at the Villisca house, the two Stillinger sisters. One of them was molested before their death, and seminal fluid was found at the scene of the crime. I'm not going to share the gritty details of that specific scene, although I will say that in The Man from the Train, the authors point out that several of the cases that they looked at each shared that one factor to one degree or another. They would even go so far as to say that perhaps this was the motive all along. But The Man from the Train doesn't just link these cases together. They also name a suspect. They describe Paul Mueller as a German immigrant moving through North America in the late 1800s and early 1900s by rail. And they argue that they can link him to a long run of family axe murders, in as many as 100 incidents across the country. In the book, Mueller's trail begins when he is named as a suspect in an early axe murder case, the 1897 murder of a family near West Brookfield, Massachusetts, where Mueller had worked as a farmhand and then vanished after a manhunt. The surviving descriptions are limited but specific. Roughly 35 at the time, little English, claims of German military service, and he was described as short and muscular with unusually small, widely spaced teeth, which was noted as a distinguishing feature. From there, the authors extend Mueller's path outward using a pattern argument, not a forensic one. The book expresses strong confidence in Mueller for 14 family murders, totaling around 59 victims, with lower confidence attribution for additional cases. Villisca would become part of that map. And the argument is so convincing that the modern Villisca Wikipedia page now lists Paul Mueller among later suspects and ties that listing to James's theory. So basically how they come up with Mueller as a popular suspect is that they tracked him from job to job across the country via the rail system. There were periods of time that he actually actively worked on the railroad and periods of time that he would get off of the rail line and then work as a farmhand. And generally speaking, most of the places that he stopped over a period of about 15 years either experienced an axe murder locally or was very near the scene of a crime in a neighboring town. And, as usual, all of those crime scenes would fit the majority of the narrative proposed in The Man from the Train and the Billy the Axeman hypothesis. Remember, covered mirrors, covered windows, and families done to death with the blunt side of an axe. All of them in close proximity to a rail line and Paul Mueller. I gotta tell you, I've read a lot about Villisca, and I have never read a theory as compelling as this one. Nor was I aware that so many other murderers had the exact same MO, to the point that it's almost staggering. I mean, what are the odds that so many murders would be committed with the blunt side of an axe, and they're all family annihilations? That is an incredibly uncommon way to use an axe. And I've certainly read a lot of vintage true crime stories where the opposite was true. Even if we don't focus on the weapon itself and how it was used, all of the other details kind of make this a very compelling argument for me. But no matter how compelling the theory actually is, remember that conclusive proof is very difficult to come by after a century. Because without a handwritten confession from Mueller that he committed all of these crimes, all we can do is speculate. While speculation can account for quite a lot of facts and details, it cannot prove a case beyond a shadow of a doubt, or make someone unequivocally guilty without concrete evidence. And that's just something we're never going to get, no matter how clever the argument. This is where the story leaves us. A town, a house, 8 lives, and an open question that after a century has never been answered. Well, that's it for me, guys. I'm going to go rest my voice and have some tea while I pray that I start breathing like a normal human again later on this evening. This one was a bit of a short episode because I really just want everybody to read that book and come and talk to me about it because I am obsessed. You can grab a copy of The Man from the Train anywhere books are sold. CJ will be back in a couple of days and we will record the next episode in our regular format. Hey, if you guys like the show and want to support us, don't forget about our Patreon at patreon.com/timeandtalespodcast. You can support the show for free by just leaving us a review on whichever platform you listen. Throw us a like and a quick review, and we'd really appreciate it. Honestly, absolutely nothing helps us as much as that. Drop by the Time and Tales Instagram account at timeandtalespod, or drop us an email at timeandtalespodcast@gmail.com. See you next time, guys.